Welcome to the Real Estate Dads podcast. We have special guest Matthew Owens, who we've known for a long time in the industry. He's definitely been someone who has a lot of experiences, does a lot in the business, raises capital for a lot of different types of projects, and we're going to hear more about those. But also we're going to talk about just more of the experience he has being a father and his experience in work-life balance, and really just how his upbringing and current life, how those balance out with all of the work that he does, because he's a very busy individual, which he's going to tell us about. And we're looking forward to hearing his stories. So Matthew, let's just jump over to you. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm excited about this topic. And I saw the topic. I was like, oh, this is different. That's awesome to talk about these things that nobody else talks about.
Yeah. And, and that's one of those things that we're hoping you've got some, I'll call it anything that is interesting for the listeners. Everyone has experience of growing up, things that their fathers did great, things that wish their fathers did differently. And then, of course, sadly, our kids are going to have things that are going to be the same. Or I shouldn't say sad, the good and the bad. But, we're all working through, our own fatherhood journeys. And, we're just really happy to have you share yours with us. So let's just jump right in. How many kids you got?
I have an 8-year-old son and a 5-year-old terrorist daughter. So she is a firecracker, I'll say. So it's pretty fun. It's just like most parents, it's nonstop chaos in the household, of course.
I am sure. When did you start this business and how old were they at that point in time?
My story is, I'm a CPA. I quit I was doing tax and audit for different CPA firms, graduated from UC Santa Barbara with a degree in economics with an emphasis in accounting, and quit my CPA firm job in 2006 to go into real estate full time right before the real estate crash. So I was a real estate genius for about a year and a half before I got my ass handed to me, of course. But since then, we have flipped now over 1,000 houses. We have over 35 million lent out to flippers in different markets. I've raised over $150 million for real estate. We do a lot of value add multifamilies, mobile home parks. We invest in debt, doing all different and other businesses and things like that. And so I have great teams to help me and keep my sanity, of course. At the same time, right in the middle of all this, my kids were born, right? So I would say, an older father, where I was 37 when my son was born and I'm 45 now. I feel like I appreciate them more because I'm not in my 20s being a bad father, going out drinking probably still what I would have been doing, if I was a younger father. And then it kind of changed my perspective where, yes, in the beginning, it's scary for fathers, right? We just want to make sure we're going to provide and make sure that we're going to be able to create enough money to support our family. And it becomes almost like you can dive too deep into trying to fill that. And it becomes a emotional and psychological thing, right? Where you got to take that step back still and spend time with the kids, so, and be in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think, for me, it's stress. I look at all these things that I want to provide. And then, to one thing we talked about before this podcast, but the kernel of that is to be there for the kids, which is what we all, want to work out and balance. So please continue. And that was so impressive. So 1,000 homes, raised 150 million for real estate deals. I mean, there were so many things that you mentioned in there. That was a lot. And I can only imagine that was even a ramped up experience from when, you started to now, which is just such a wide breadth of experiences.
Yeah, I've got a lot of wrinkles from that, right? So, and my wife has been through a lot too, because of course, when I take a loss, which you're going to take losses in this game, right? In any business. And when you go through trials and tribulations and, stresses and all that kind of stuff, your family sees that on you, right? And they're right there with you a lot of times. I try to shield my wife from some of the stresses I go through because I'm like, half of it, 99% of my fear is not going to ever come to fruition. So why give her that fear, and I take it on my shoulders myself, which could be to my detriment on my own stress level. Got to meditate a lot, of course. But at the end of the day, you realize how much your business can affect your family too. I remember taking a loss and telling my wife, hey, I just lost, I remember 50 grand. And back then that was a huge amount for me. And I was telling her, hey, put your hand on my chest. I can't breathe. I just lost a salary today. This is just a hard emotional thing to deal with. But then you realize when you have a mindset shift, like after that occurred, I remember getting up the next morning and saying, okay, I'm going to find a way to make this money back like today. What can I do right now? What action items can I do right now to make that back? And I ended up getting another deal under contract and wholesaling it to another 1031 exchange investor and making me $70,000 on that, one deal. And that mindset shift for me enabled me that empowerment of getting through that adversity and emotionally coming over that. It wasn't really just like, the hit wasn't going to ruin me, but at the same time, like emotionally that was tough, but getting through the emotion of that helps you like really show the things that you want to teach your kids and take that step back and say, don't give them everything. Make life hard for them, so that because it's like, what's the story? Like weak men create, or I don't know what it was. Yeah, exactly. So don't let your kids be weak by pampering their butts, so.
You're bringing up a very real factor in the market right now, which people hear of this, but it's victims of fluency. And, and Jordan Peterson and Andrew Huberman talk about this, quite a bit, where there's these, you get dopamine from having merit-based accomplishments. And that's anything. You work hard and you get a dopamine reward as a result of that. And there's some individuals who unfortunately don't have that given to them. And that's one thing as a father that I recognize where, I say, I really want to make sure I'm pushing my kids. And, and one thing that, you just kind of touched on, and, Trevor, I hope you don't have any stories of losing money, but, in entrepreneurship, these things occur. But, the black eyes that we get are also these experiences that we want to be able to, come back from, learn from, and they carve us. They carve us, they make us better. And they also, in your situation, you turned it into a win. You said, hey, I've got to fix this. This money was, lost in this, whatever opportunity was. And you went out and said, hey, I've got it. You didn't let it sink you.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that you realize that these adversity things that actually happen to you push you in the direction you should be going anyways. And so even those losses are, get to the point where you realize they are there for you to get through and to deal with the pain at the time you need it. And I know it sounds, a little crazy, but at the same time, it really is 100% true. Like I just, about a year ago, a little bit more than that, I took a 400,000 plus hit from a contractor that stole a bunch of money from me. Right. And it's crazy is that because of the hits I took in the past and the adversity I got through, I'm able to just be like, okay, yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm like went after the dude and did what I needed to do to make sure, but I'm still, taking the L on it, because it doesn't, never is worth it. But, emotionally, you're able to move forward with those things, which permeate into strength to show your kids because, you could talk to your blue in the face, but if I'm doing the opposite of what I'm telling my kids, they're seeing what I'm doing. Right. And it really makes you take that step back and look at yourself and say, how do I change myself? Because everything is internal 100% so that I can present the best light and teach my kids the most. And it really makes you have that yearning to have that self-awareness about yourself. Because if you can teach that to your kids, like I'll give you an example. My daughter, emotional breakdown like every 5-year-old does, and I'm sitting there talking to her saying, baby, you have the control. You have the control. I want you to breathe through your nose really deep and breathe out really, as well. And keep doing that. Do it with me. And I'll do it with her to calm her down emotionally. And then I'm like, and of course she's in the beginning, I don't have control, like and all this, of course. But once that happens, it really made a switch in me because I remember the next day when I did that for her, she goes to my wife and says, Daddy really helped me. He calmed me down. And, and I was just like, oh, dude, you don't realize how much of an effect you being able to go through hits and have your own emotional control in place happens. And you can't always do it. You got to cut yourself a break when you get mad or, curse sometimes or whatever. Right. So
it's emotional control. And, and for this, $400,000 hit you took, that's such a huge number. But, you handled it, what it sounds like a professional. And, and had this opportunity to also, really, had a teaching moment to your daughter on emotional control. And, because those are when those things start. And, that brings into something that we all see as adults where you see people who don't have good emotional control. And then, and I always wonder, I go, where did this start? At what point was it that there was something that went off the rails that, someone was able to, get so far down the road that, you see a bad decisions being made as a result of, poor emotional control.
Right. And I think it's important to understand like these, a lot of times when they don't have that emotional control, it's a lack of confidence in themselves because when you take a hit and you stand back up and you actually become successful after that, you become strong, and your mentality becomes strong, and you're able to have a lot more of that control than you would have ever had before. And a lot of people haven't taken those hits. And so they're going to be more angry at people and, more fly off the handle instead of saying, how do I get what I need out of this situation by having the right tact and the right strategy instead of, because that negativity towards others doesn't ever get you what you want. Maybe every once in a while when you got to chew somebody out or something, but it's not usually common, right? So that's going to help.
Max, you said something that kind of like, where does it start? And I think that's a good question because everyone at some point takes a hit in their life and like getting back up, I remember watching my, family members and I mean, they were pretty strong men, but I had to kind of like consciously go to the next level and just, I'm working on like Matt's level of emotional management, but I'm curious, Matt, like where did that start for you? Is that something that you saw yourself growing up in your family, or did you have to like make a conscious shift to be like that?
So I definitely had, I'll say, not anger issues, but I would get angry for 3 seconds and then be fine afterwards, or, get mad and have that outburst and then stop myself, over a period of time. And my dad had that too. He would get angry about stuff and stubborn about stuff. I saw him growing up being, even though he had that, he was a military guy. He was a ranger and a sniper in Vietnam. He was a black belt in karate and like literally was my, crutch in a lot of ways, where I'd go to him and had a massive amount of respect for him. There was also a healthy amount of fear there too, because he's a strong dude and he's going to tell you exactly what he thinks. And you're not going to go and talk to him in certain ways. You know what I mean? And so there was that clear boundary. At the same time, he was really strong, and I lost him when I was 26 years old and he was 56 years old. And it was probably one of the hardest things of my entire life to deal with, because he was the person that I would go to with all of the problems in my life, that I needed advice from and things like that. And I still remember the day before he died, I told him he could go, and I had a 1-year-old little sister at the time, and she's now 19 years old now, which is crazy. She doesn't care about money at all. I keep trying to talk to her about money, but she doesn't care. She's 19. But, and I told my dad, hey, I got this. You can go. Like, I'll make sure my sister's taken care of. I'll make sure my brother's taken care of. And I think it screwed me up a little bit, right? Where I grind to mentally take care of the family to the detriment of myself. And I was doing that for detriment of my health for a long time too, because, I was 35 pounds more than I am right now and would eat bad and not exercise as much. And it affected my home life massively because I was so focused on grind. I have to do this. I have to take care of everybody. And I've always had that in my head where I have this underlying psychological need to take care of people, whether I should or not. Sometimes I shouldn't waste time helping like random people, because it's to my detriment. But I had to get out of that, right? I had to go to counseling to say, what is causing this inside me? Let me go back and think about what has affected me in my life. And that was what made me have a lot more of that emotional control, is realizing the reasons why I was this way I was, and focusing on too much work and not enough family, and having to feel like I have to grind. I have to get this done because otherwise my family is not going to get what they need, which is untrue, right?
And do you feel like that effort to, and I'm so sorry for your loss, what you described as, that it was a hard event that you really, had some massive growth from and stepped into a role of both stress and, this, giving your father this peace, before he passed. Was that something that he also taught you and a lot of those skills from growing up? Say, hey, you need to be an individual who, when the challenge comes up, you need to meet it? Or did you, when it came to counseling, those other things you described, were those things that you brought in yourself and said, those weren't things came from my father, but I have to figure them out going forward?
Yeah. I really think a lot of that came from the upbringing I had from my father and my mom, where, especially my father being a strong man, it was expected that we're going to be strong too. You know what I mean? And there was very little emotion in my household, not a lot of hugs and all that kind of stuff. It was, my dad was working hard, working 2 jobs and stuff like that. My mom worked as well. And, my dad, it took my parents going through a divorce before he realized that he was too much of a hard ass and loosened up a little bit. You know what I mean? And getting out of the emotional situation of marriage and all that stuff. And he wasn't, crazy or anything like that. But, at the same time, a lot of that he taught me, hey, this is what you do. You stand up to that adversity and you push yourself and you take responsibility, for what you're doing. And I think that's what I was probably emotionally and mentally doing at the time by giving my dad that piece when he passed and telling him that, when that occurred. Don't get me wrong, it was still the hardest damn thing in the world. But at the same time, you realize all of a sudden I stepped into the leader of the family role at 26, which honestly was, this adversity is what gives you the character that you need to be in order to be successful in business and family. And I've had a lot of it, from my parents, divorce to my dad passing to failing in business immediately. Like when I quit my CPA firm job to go into real estate, we were flipping a bunch of houses. I got an office at the World Trade Center in Long Beach on the 23rd floor. We're doing everything wrong, but I thought I was dope because we're flipping houses and I had a 790 credit score with 290 grand worth of empty credit card lines available to me. And my whole ego was based off of this persona of me being a CPA where I don't ever miss bills. I always make sure I'm take care of business that we're flipping. And, all of a sudden when we lost everything and I lost my credit, my ego was destroyed, where I was just like, oh my God, what? The worst thing that I could think would happen to me at the time was my credit getting destroyed. Now I can think of some worse things, but at the same, and obviously this is very little adversity compared to a lot of things people go through with a lot of different deaths and stuff like that. And, losing kids or other stuff is just not even a comparison, but it's this stuff that happens to you that gives you that character, I think, over time. And I think I had a good base with my father that, started there. I have a ton of respect for him and I still give his good friends a lot of crap still to this day and talk trash just like he would, so.
Those tragedies, you're right. There's such I don't want to say competition, but in the grand scope, there's always these other things you hear about and you go, my gosh, who went through whatever that was. I think for your story, what I find really fascinating about it is that, for what was, pretty serious tragedy, that you were a swimmer. You went, hey, I'm just going to step up, and I'm going to step up and I'm going to do this.
I'm curious, man, you were talking about I've been struggling with I've been getting better, but how to, manage time, not just in business, but in personal life with family and, making sure I'm a good dad and coming up with ways to help my kids become an adult someday. And you mentioned you're going to go speak to people about this. you got to put together a presentation on teaching that to people. What does that look like? What are you doing there?
So look, don't get me wrong. I think we're all a work in process in this area, as getting out of our own head and making sure we're living in the moment with the kids, right? I think the biggest thing is when you are with the kids, making sure you're living in the moment. You're not, focused on other things and constantly, in your head thinking about the next business thing. Being there, focused on them is a big key, right? And, obviously everybody can get the hell off their phones, and stuff like that. Of course, all of us can. It's a big addiction for, tons of people out there, including myself sometimes because I got a ton of things going. At the same time, I try my hardest to literally have this, system in place where I'm at certain times I'm separating my business and personal life. And I do a lot of that through meditation. It helps me clear my mind to before going in the house, just sit there for 10 minutes and breathe. I do that in the morning and then right before I try to go in the house, because how do you turn your brain off when you're going 100 miles an hour and you got a million things and you still have a million things to do, but you're like, I got to cut it off. I have to separate. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is planning, right? What do you want to do with your kids? I have a list on my desk that's make sure all the things I want to make sure I get done every day that's outside of work, right? That's meditation, proper sleep, vitamins, working out, playing with the kids, planning outings with the kids where, hey, you're just going to go to the park twice a week with the kids. And then other times of the week for twice a week, you're going to go play, I'll call it, cash flow for kids or something like that, right? Robert Kiyosaki financial education game, or you're going to teach them something like that. I literally have a list of every class, every topic that I want my kids to learn, including law and real estate and finance and, it's, and then emotional control and relationships and things like that. The things that I think growing up, a lot of us weren't taught, were you taught how to deal with girls, when you're growing up as a boy? You're not, like, yeah, you might talk about it a little bit, but it's not like something that's taught to you on how to actually not be nervous and how to like, how to break a conversation and really just have confidence. Right. And so, focusing on the things that you think you didn't get growing up and making a list of those things to say, these are the things I really want to teach. Like I started doing videos with my son where I'm, talking to him about what his favorite things are, just like this. And, on a video. And of course he's like, I was like, what's your favorite thing in the world, buddy? And he's like, I love it when you coach me at basketball, Dad. So of course now I'm coaching for the rest of my life, but so.
This is great. This is great. So you have them on this full curriculum of things.
Well, right. And don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's way over their pay grade right now, for law and, auditing, in accounting.
You done the cash flow game? Have you done that one with them?
Yeah, they do that. And, I try to teach them about the mentality. And of course, both of my kids hate the government as much as I do. So that's a little personality trait that they got, so, but yeah, I mean, looking at it from that scale and saying, what do I want to teach them? Is there something that I can talk to them about to teach them, consistently on a daily basis, just out of this topic list? Is there like something I could bring up that they would be interested in, just to have a conversation each day, or, if you can't do that, maybe every other day or something like that, to just have a 15-minute conversation with your kids about those topics and teaching them something that you think is valuable. I remember my dad, he literally made us get out a checkbook and taught us that. When I was doing accounting classes in college, he was teaching accounting at Loyola Marymount in LA, and literally made me do extra homework. I'm like, I'm in college. Like, screw you, dude. I don't want to do this. Like, are you kidding me right now? All I care about is girls. Here, have an Old English 40 with me, Dad. He's like, seriously, an Old English 40? What's wrong with you? So, but like, that's what you think about in college, right? So, but it's, at the same time, even though I didn't want to do it and I knew I didn't want to do it, those things were majorly ingrained in me, right? And it's cutting your kids a break and realizing, yeah, they're never, ever, ever going to do exactly what you want them to do. I specifically remember my dad catching me and my buddies in the backyard smoking pot when we were like 15 years old or something like that. And I was shocked. My friends were about to run over the wall because they didn't want to get in trouble with their parents. And he didn't get any of us in trouble. He just said, look, guys, you guys are too young. Don't lie to me about it. I won't ever get you in trouble for this, but I'll talk to you about it and tell you why you shouldn't be doing it. And that permeated massively with me, just to be open and say, look, you're going to be stupid. You're going to make mistakes. I did some really stupid things in junior high and high school that you're going, wow, how did I live? You know what I mean? So how did I survive? And I think you got to cut your kids a break and realize they're going to make their own mistakes and they're not going to follow exactly in your footsteps what you want,
He used it as an education moment, which is the better way to have him be available to you, really, than closing that door. You hear a lot of fathers who don't, they blow their stack and they get really pissed off. And all of a sudden, when there's more serious issues, the kids don't come back to the dad. They don't want to talk to him because they know they'll get mad, versus that scenario that really probably opened a lot of communication with you guys.
Right. And it's funny because you get different traits from different parents. Even though my dad made me do that with the bookkeeping, he wasn't necessarily great with saving money and doing all that stuff. He would spend money. My mom saved like $20,000, 25 grand in college while she, penny pinching everything, and was a saver and, super responsible with money and all that stuff. And it's funny because you get different traits from different people. And I think having a 2-parent household really does significantly help with, the upbringing, because a father is super important because they give that guidance and direction and that sternness that I think kids need. And the mom obviously gives the emotional support a lot more than the dad does, so both of those things are massively important from a well-rounded kid standpoint, of course.
That was freaking awesome, man. That was so many strings we could pull and we could go forever. But thank you for your stories and your openness and honest, the amount of value you provided. Just me sitting here listening, I got to make a list for my kids right away. So thank you.
Yeah, get it in your head so that it's always there. I literally go out and I'm like, okay, what the heck could I, because sometimes when you're in the moment, how do you think about that, right? So write down 50 things you could do for free with your kids, or, minimal cost, so that you're pick one, go do it, just get out, and go do it.
So Matthew, do you have a meditation guided meditation that is on YouTube? Do you just have something you do yourself, or how do you do that?
So I actually follow Wim Hof. I don't know if you know who he is, but he basically has been able to control his body temperature and his immune system and heal himself through meditation and breathing, which is incredible. They've actually showed him in freezing weather where his body temperature is at a consistent degrees, where it's not getting cold because he's able to heat himself internally. And so the power of meditation is key. I really just try to go and sit there for 15 minutes at a minimum each time I meditate and try to get out of my own head and breathe and focus on my breathing, because breathing is, getting oxygen in your system is probably one of the healthiest things you can do as well. So just breathing deep and then exhaling deep consistently for 15 minutes straight really calms you. Like if you, Andrew Huberman was one of the ones that I read this for, what he said, hey, breathe deep, and then take one more breath, like deeper. And it like opens up these endorphins inside you where it like gets all the oxygen in your system and really helps you de-stress massively. And so I try to practice doing that and just clearing my mind. And it's hard because you will automatically start thinking and you're like, beat yourself up about it. And you're like, go back to your breathing. So it takes practice to do that. But I try to follow Wim Hof on that, and also try to meditate a couple times a day doing that, especially when you're dealing with high stress environments. There's days where you're dealing with, 50 problems before noon on a Monday, and you're just like, oh God, I got to breathe. Like, you start to feel it in your gut. You start to feel it in your stress levels, and you're like, no, let me just take a step back for a minute. And then also thinking about what you're grateful for while you're doing that really helps put the fears and stresses in perspective and saying, hey, I got my health. My kids are healthy right now. I have a loving wife and a family, and, I'm coaching basketball, and, putting the real life in perspective instead of you're going, this is money. It doesn't really matter. I'll be dead and it's all going to be gone. Who cares?
It's even funny money with how much the government's printing it.
Yeah, it's all fake, so go trade and barter food. That's why I want to farm,
When we've talked about so much already, is there anything that's going on in the world today that, you really feel like you want to be ahead of with your kids? You mentioned, your father kind of catching you guys, when you're 15. Are there any of these experiences that you're either projecting on that you're going to deal with eventually, or things that are going on right now that you're really wanting to focus on?
So, a lot of what I care about a lot is, two primary things: financial education and also so that because 90% of the people out there don't have the right financial education to be able to support themselves. I see a lot of doctors and attorneys and things like that make great money, but they don't know the direction of where they're going. They don't understand how to never trade their time for money again, or build those assets that will do that for them long term, as well, and have control over their real future instead of just giving it to a broker, for example, and letting them, do what they do with it. Right. And with lack of incentive for performance and all that kind of stuff involved. So there's so many scams out there that you see a lot of people taking hits, and a lot of lack of knowledge base about how to develop passive cash flow streams, how to invest and do homework on, property and deals and investments. And so like, I have a big yearning to teach them about that, but also I think it's super important nowadays to focus a lot on self-sustainment and being able to survive outside of the current system that we are in. Learning how to grow food, for example, learning how, water purification works and, self-sustainment works, and, all of that kind of stuff, I think is the utmost importance right now. I personally am very nervous about the stability of the overall economy and our governments and all that kind of stuff, and and central bank digital currencies and all these risks that I see out there. And I think that the risk of global financial collapse and U.S. collapse is greater than it's ever been because of the amount of printing and the instability that creates out there. And I think it's super important to be able to survive long term, to know those things. And so as a parent, you're like, how do I make sure my kids are happy and they don't die? Those two things, right?